Today, we're going to be talking about five-star guest communications in 2024. This is part of a two-part series. Today, we're going to focus a lot more on automations, and the next part, we're going to focus a lot more on AI. So humans, automations, AI, and finding that balance that actually works. To start off, my name is Francois. I'm the co-founder of Enzo Connect. We are a guest experience platform for the vacation rental industry, and our mission is really simple: digitize and monetize the guest experience. We do this in three different ways. We increase revenue per guest, we save you time, and we create more five-star bookings. The reason why we're focusing a lot on communication today is because we are going to be releasing Enzo AI's Inbox V2 very soon. So for those of you who are customers of Enzo, you will see that update in the platform shortly, which is going to include things like archiving conversations, AI translations, quick commands to send your boarding pass, and so on. Again, not here to sell you guys, though. We're here to present more about communication. And if you have any questions about what Enzo Connect does, feel free to reach out after this webinar. The overview of today's conversation is some of the challenges of short-term rental guest messaging, what guests actually want, what operators do today, the big hospitality debate between too much automation, AI, and sending and greeting and doing things manually, how you can build those messaging automations, and some of the best practices around that. We've seen too often people build too many conditions, too many workflows, too many automations, and still get a lot of guest questions, or other people who format it completely differently, and of course, still get a lot of those guest questions. So let's start with the challenge. And I'm sure all of you already know this. We all face this frustration in the industry, but it's really, there's no universal standard in vacation rentals. Unlike a hotel where you just know that there's going to be a front desk, or if there's an issue, you'll be able to sort it out in person. In the vacation rental industry, we don't really have that luxury. And this has kind of created inconsistent practices because of different operator backgrounds. Some are a bit more tech savvy, others aren't. So some will do everything manually, will send messages to their guests individually. Others will automate everything or too much, or others will even go about using AI, hoping that it'll just answer their problems for them. So that has led to lack of guest confidence in the industry. That's always been an issue in the vacation rental space, which we haven't necessarily seen in hotels. Some of the solutions to these problems is being as anticipatory as possible and constantly being available, quick responses, and a diversity in mediums and touch points, which I'll explain a bit more later. Now, I know the idea of being constantly available sounds horrific to many of us. The idea of being 24/7 available isn't practical when you're managing a certain number of listings. And I would say one of the challenges is when you're in that sort of 1 to 15, 1 to 20, 1 to 25 listing mark, it's harder and more expensive, unless you're the owner, to hire a massive guest experience team or as many VAs as you'd need to cover all hours of the day. That 20 to 100 mark, it becomes a bit more practical, but expensive. And that's where automation plays a very important role. And above 100 listings, you should have the revenue to balance between human, automation, and AI to address those. Let's go through what guests actually want. And whenever I start something about guests, I always say, start by understanding who are your guests. Now, this is a quick data source from Skift in April of 2024 and shared in the US that for vacation rentals specifically, the average age, 57% of them are between 25 to 44 years old. The marital status, 52% are married or in a domestic partnership. The travel type is usually leisure, family, or adventure. People usually work partially or fully remote, which is a very interesting data point and something you might want to consider when equipping your properties. We've had property managers add things like a monitor and advertise that to their guests. And I think it's a really unique thing to advertise so they know that they can remotely work, share Wi-Fi speeds, and so on. And then 47% are managers or below managerial level. So understanding the audience that you're catering to, of course, every vacation rental business is different. We were operating with a business in France, in rural France, and most of the guests didn't necessarily have a Wi-Fi enabled cell phone. So that can cause changes to how you adapt your guest experience. But for the most part, try to understand who your guests are and what they want. Another survey indicated that 70% of guests are completely open to automated messaging. 30% of travelers are very interested in hotels using automated messaging. I know this is hotel specific data, but we can learn a lot from those groups that are doing that research intensively in hotels and apply certain principles in vacation rentals. I like to say most property managers in the industry are just fragmented hoteliers. You manage a bunch of different hotels, and that's what your job is. 47.6% are interested, but it really depends on the service that they're requesting. So that concept of having in person can feel necessary in some cases. If you haven't heard of Japan's robot hotel that was launched a few years back, they fired all of the robots. So the reason they fired all of the robots is because it was creating even more work for the humans in the hotel than ever. It wasn't able to answer all of the questions. I took the least creepy image of this, which is, a robot that's pictured as a lady, but they had a robot that was also a dinosaur, and you would communicate with a dinosaur. So maybe that didn't help as well. Even though 80% of guests would be willing to stay at a hotel or a vacation rental with a completely automated front desk, self-service kiosk, or check-in process, we still need to be cautious on how we deliver that experience. And 36% have admitted turning to AI for recommendations while booking travel. So the concept of search, the concept of going to the operator and the host or the concierge service and so on for recommendations is shifting towards AI, and you can be a part of that wave. Again, we're going to focus on automations today, but we will dive into AI a bit more in the next one. What operators do, the role and state of automation workflows and guest communication. Let's start off again with some data here. 50% of hospitality executives are using or testing automated messaging systems. I'm sure many of you have set up already some very basic workflows, your pre-check-in message, your booking confirmation message, as you should. Taking it to the next step is what we're talking about today. And 22.4% consider implementing within the next year. So if you haven't even started building automations and you're still handling things manually, now would be a great time to start doing so. You are going to save so much time on some of the basic automations you can send out there. In terms of AI, 64.8% of vacation rental operators doubt AI's effectiveness in fostering genuine human connection. 54.4% do not believe AI can handle complex, nuanced customer complaints effectively. And over 70% use AI in their everyday business. Those three data points are really interesting. This is shared by Hostaway's report. And I think one of the things that's really unique here to point out is the fact that even though AI was overhyped a year ago and is still a very important part of our life today, we need to understand where it's really strategically available and where it isn't. If you hear any promises that AI are just going to answer all of your guest messages for you and rent out your properties for you and so on, we're not there yet. AI right now is in the format of translating language. It is not in the format of reasoning. Once we get to a stage where AI can start reasoning better and understanding really what guests want, this will be a complete game changer for your business. At the moment, though, you can still very much leverage AI for everyday tasks, as well as drafting responses, even responding to certain key topics. So 70% of respondents have said that they're already using AI in everyday business, and I think that's awesome to get ahead of the competition. The big debate is always how much to automate, how much not to automate. Where does the line stop? Where should human interaction kick in? And one of my favorite examples that we found from a Facebook group from someone who presented what they were doing on the booking. They invite the guests to discuss their stay to establish a rapport. Then a week before their stay, they remind the guests about the upcoming stay, get them excited. 2 days before arrival, they switch the communication to texting for immediate access. On check-in day, they send them information and so on. So they've kind of built out that roadmap of what is the ideal guest journey. What do guests want from the moment they book the property and they're excited and they want their stay to even after they've stayed, when you're trying to get reviews and so on to drive that sort of circular and recursive wheel of getting more guests. But how much is too much? And this is where being able to understand each guest and flipping the journey based on different guest parameters is really important. The guests don't just want the automation, it's you need this for your business to scale. The pros of creating the right automation systems is obviously enhanced efficiency, cost reduction, and constant availability. You also prevent human error. If you have VAs around the world, they may not fully understand the property as you've seen it in person. They haven't. So documentation and so on, and then automating based on that documentation is key to prevent human error. And of course, quick responses. At the end of the day, whenever we're messaging a service, a software, really any service, we want a quick response. We want to get to that customer service quality that most tech companies have created, fortunately or unfortunately. If you message Uber Eats, for example, you'll get a response within barely 2 minutes. And I think that's the kind of reaction time that unfortunately guests expect, partially for two reasons. One, because most of you price your vacation rentals similarly to hotels, and so they expect a hotel quality experience in their vacation rental. But two, also because That is the new standard in today's service industry. The cons is, of course, we start losing that human touch, potential job displacement, and of course, an initial investment in the right technologies. How to build that messaging automation that works. Let's look into it. Well, the first thing is we asked a bunch of VRMs about the main aspects of their work and where can automation really have an impact. And we heard the classic 4 buckets: guest communication, check-ins and checkouts, bookings and calendar management, dynamic pricing. We're going to focus enormously on communication today. The main thing to understand, because a lot of people think that AI will just solve all of their problems, the recurring can be automated with workflows, and the occasional can be solved with AI. That's how we bucket things. If it's a recurring pattern, if it's a recurring question, if it's a recurring system, you can just have a simple workflow. You do not need to have a fancy AI tool to send basic booking confirmation messages. That's not necessary. But the occasional is where AI is going to play an important role. Things that can't necessarily be handled by a workflow, or you're not sure when that workflow should be triggered, and triggers and actions in a minute here. So when, how much, and how. I've done a presentation before on this. We call it schedule, medium, and touch points. And my personal favorite is when I book a vacation rental and this is what I get as a guest message. Unstructured, unformatted, very large blurb of text. And quite frankly, if I'm in a rush, if I'm tired, I'm just going to ask you a question. So my first question is going to be, when's check-in? And if you can decipher when the check-in is in this message, fantastic. My next question is going to be, how do I get in? And again, if you can decipher where you're going to find this information in this message, let me know. It is somewhere in there, but it is quite the blurb of text to read through to get to the information that I need to, the Wi-Fi and so on. Let's switch the format a bit. Let's break things out and let's start thinking about the schedule. The schedule is your frequency of which you want to be able to send those messages. Inquiry, booking confirmation, guest verification, contact list check-in, and so on. And you're breaking out the stages of the guest journey. So the moment the guest messages you is the beginning of the experience. Once they've stayed in the property and they've left, the experience doesn't stop there. This is where we shift from being a selling the guest to book the property, to being a marketer, marketing them to come back and book again with you. And I think we've got some great examples of people who've done phenomenally well in this audience. I see quite a few names of vacation rental companies that are able to do this well when it comes to their guests and drive more direct bookings. The medium and touch points is the concept of how and when. Frequency, how often are we going? When is exactly which time of day does it make sense? Does it make sense, for example, to send a message at 3 in the morning before the check-in to the guest to inform them about their check-in instruction, or 8 p.m. the day before? Understanding that is actually quite important. And I'll give you a context. There's a property manager that we work with out of Yukon. Yukon is up north in Canada, quite far up north. Whitehorse, Yukon specifically. And a lot of people fly in. And when you look at the flight patterns, anyone who's flying in flies in around, I think it's like 11 noon. And so being able to message guests before their flight so they have all of that information is quite important. Knowing that you're sending the information at noon, at 1, at 2 p.m. might put them in a bit of an anxious position before their flight, not knowing how they're going to check in. Similarly, for Iceland, we've seen the same thing. A lot of international flights fly in at a specific time, arrive very early in the morning, 6, 7, 8 a.m. So being able to understand how your guests are traveling to you. In the US, 57% represent driving to the property. So that's something important to know as well. And then the how is the medium. So how are you sending this information? Is it a notification that you're sending via SMS? Is it a WhatsApp message? Is it a guest app? Is it a link to a guide? Being able to understand that format that you're sending the information to is really important to drive that seamless experience. We don't want to go into this massive blurb message. It has all of the information, and yes, some guests will go through it, but this is where you still get a lot of repeated questions. And I've heard so many times people say, oh my God, I get this question all the time, and I send them the information and they just don't read. The idea of using the schedule, medium, and touch points to build out your guest journey is going to be really key. We are going to send you a little report on that after as well, so feel free to stick around. So to build high-performing automated messaging workflows, you need to think about the 3 main things. What processes are the most time-consuming? What questions do guests frequently ask? And what issues constantly frustrate you? Put it down on a piece of paper. Sit down, write it down, and just go through these different components. you'll be able to see, okay, these are repeated for every single guest. These ones we can handle manually because they're exception cases, and so on. And then start thinking about the workflow as if this, then that. One of my favorite companies in tech, and this is kind of how we started Enzo Connect. I was really big on this IFTT. It's a company kind of like Zapier, but for smart home devices, and it allowed you to connect. If your Alexa, you say this, then it turns on the lights and so on. And I got really nerdy with my place and just converted it into a smart place. But the same concept applies to your vacation rental automations. So it's the concept of a trigger when that event is going to get triggered. So if it's an event like a guest inquiry or a guest message or a booking confirmation, etc., and when that trigger is going to be sent. Now, I've given you the very basic ones, and some people have the tendency of just going into this sort of workflow mind map where they build too much. If you're just getting started in the concept of if this and that trigger and actions, to start really simple and then build it out from there. You can get so creative, but you can also trip and fall when you build too many workflows, because you can forget that there's what we call mutual exclusiveness or non-mutual exclusiveness. If something happens, am I always going A or am I potentially going B? Being able to create these different workflows are going to be key. The trigger, the usual ones that we've seen: guest inquires, the booking is confirmed, the guest is about to check in, and so on. But you can go even further than that with the right technology. For example, when a guest requests an upsell, approving that upsell is a trigger. So if I approve an upsell, I want to send an automatic message. Another example could be verification. When a guest completes the verification, I want to let them know that they've completed the verification. And if they haven't completed the verification, I also want to let them know that they need to complete that verification. Trigger, action. Start thinking about what are the triggers to the workflows that are causing you a lot of time, and then figure out whether or not there's an action that you can send out. And you can get really creative with this. We've seen dozens of examples, obviously, on our platform. The average number of workflows per user is about 36 different workflows, which is quite a lot. And you can think of the actions not just as the guest, but also external stakeholders. So if something happens in your business, does someone else need to be aware of that? So if a guest hasn't paid their reservation and it's a day before the guest checks in, and the sentiment of that guest isn't great and they are not purchasing an upsell, is there someone in your team that needs to be notified so that we can send a message and push something to that guest to complete whatever information needs to be done? So think creatively of that trigger and that action. As one of the little last bits here, this is a very short webinar. We've generated a report now for Vacation Rental Host. This is completely free. There's no commitment whatsoever. You can request it by scanning the QR code here or going to the URL enzoconnect.com/AI report. There's two reports. There's a general report for anyone who's not on a PMS that supports messaging. And then for those of you who are on Hostaway, Booking Sync, Lodgify, Guesty, and Hostify, you will get a report with your data. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the current AI models that we're going to be releasing as part of the Inbox 2.0 to basically give you all of the different categories of guest messages that you are getting. So are you getting 20% complaints? Are you getting 5 special accommodation requests or transportation requests? Using that information will allow you to know where you should build workflows, where you can use AI to respond to messages more efficiently, and of course, where you can create guidebooks effectively to answer some of those questions proactively. So if you haven't checked out this report, feel free to fill in the information. Just as a little heads up, if you are on one of the supported PMSs and you want that report for your specific data, we do connect your property management system in order to get all of those messages. We're not sending information. We're not selling your information. You can disconnect your PMS at any point. We'll send you that report shortly after. I see a few questions already, so feel free to type it in. I would like to get a message when verification is complete and once check-in is complete. Can I do that? Absolutely. So when a guest message, now, is this a message that you want to be able to send to yourself, to your team, or to your guests? All three can be done, by the way, in Enzo Connect. So this is a great way to start thinking about your workflows. Yes, when the guest completes verification, or when guest completes verification, send a notification to my team or send the guest a message. Once the guest has completed their check-in through our guest app, so this is a new way of doing this, you can also get notified that that guest has in fact checked in. Great question. So I mentioned in the beginning, I'll just go right back to what we're releasing here. Yes, we have right now we've been working a lot on these categories. And the reason why we've done this, we've seen a lot of ChatGPT for vacation rental software come out. And I think it's phenomenal because it's pushing the industry in the right direction. Unfortunately, today AI is not meant to reason. It's meant to translate data into the language. And there's a great podcast on this by Lex Friedman. If you guys like nerding out on AI like I do, he talks about the difference between reasoning and translating into language. It's a part of our brain that just is an output effectively. We're taking on all of this data and we're formatting it in a way that we can comprehend. So what we've learned today is if you just put AI and you start auto responding to any messages, it's going to start hallucinating. There are certain categories of messages that it's just not going to handle well, specifically complaints. They're too one-off type messages. So what we've been doing over the past couple of months, we've been categorizing all of your messages, which is why you get this free report. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be launching an autoresponder that allows you to choose based on the accuracy, which categories you want to autopilot the AI for. So this is the AI autoresponder that you'll see here, and you'll be able to use workflows to decide when this type of category happens, I'll let the AI respond if it's this time of the night and I'm not available. So to start building that confidence with AI chatbots and so on for the industry. Is there a way guests can get the boarding pass link looking like the black boarding pass nice picture that you have here instead of a regular link? Absolutely. That is just a branding thing. So if you go to your branding, and feel free to reach out to our team. If you're using the boarding pass, you can change that in the branding to have a background color of black and then the fonts in white. That's just a branding exercise there. The next part of the series is going to be diving into AI. So a lot of the things that I've talked about today and how you can build your AI knowledge base so that you can effectively use the tools that are out there to automate as much communication. We are also releasing a course on upsells that's going to be coming out soon. That's going to be made available free, and that will allow you to know how you can upsell better, when and where to send those messages. Thank you so much for joining, and stay tuned on the next webinar.